the mobility industry was experiencing a remarkable degree of innovation. Developments in electric vehicles, autonomous vehicles, combined with micromobility and mass transit seemed to lay the groundwork for a decade of modernization. However, after 4 months of COVID-19, the economic disruption and social distancing, where do the trends of mobility stand today? To discuss the future of mobility, I'm joined by Trevor Pawl, who's the Senior Vice President of Business Innovation at the Michigan Development Corporation. Trevor, great to speak with you today.
Great to be here, virtually.
Trevor, you just published an article, A Few Thoughts on Mobility's New Normal, that can be found on Zpryme.com. How much of a disruption has COVID-19 caused in the industry?
So the way that I see it, the mobility industry, cities or smart cities, and COVID-19 have crossed paths in 4 significant ways. The first is canceled or delayed mobility projects like Sidewalk Labs, Quayside project in Toronto, and India has canceled or delayed smart city projects across the country. And you've also seen delays in electric vehicle and autonomous vehicle launches as well. Rivian and Lincoln canceled their new EV, GMC is delaying its Hummer, and Uber and Lyft have delayed its AV fleets as they've laid off around 15% of their workforce apiece. The second way is you're seeing public transit abandoned. Between March and May of 2020, the use of mass transit in countries like the US, Australia, Germany dropped by more than 70% year over year. And in addition to that, there's new risks to taking public transit. Over 100 US transit workers died of COVID-19 in March and April, which is 100 too many. The third is what most of us are following on the industry side, and that's the shutdown and the slowdown. I guess that's happening across multiple industries, but specifically in automotive, it speaks for itself. COVID-19 shut down about 93% of all US auto production for around 2 months. And frankly, beyond just production, you saw AutoNation, the US's largest dealership network, lay off 7,000 people. So all parts of the value chain are being hit. And then when you look at the airlines, 80% to 90% drop in ticket sales, and then going forward, not being able to fill the middle seat, that's a big issue. And then finally, the fourth significant way is supply chain bottlenecks, which have hit a variety of different supply chains, but in particular, I think the PPE supply chain and the food supply chain were the two that were found to be most flawed globally, from price gouging, fraudulent transactions, and distribution delays on the PPE side. But then on the food supply chain, you're seeing these long lines outside of food banks while US farmers are throwing away crops or having to destroy their crops that they can't use. There's a disconnect there. So those are the different ways, I think, where mobility and cities and COVID-19 intersected ways.
Well, as you talk about cities, mass transit certainly was foundational for many cities across the country and across the globe. But a recent trend that had reemerged or emerged was this shared micromobility. And you mentioned this in your article. Clearly, people aren't using shared e-bikes and e-scooters at the moment. What are the near-term trends for individual mobility solutions? And do you expect to see a recovery for those shared e-bikes and e-scooters?
Yeah, so the answer is yes. I think there will be a recovery as long as the industry takes personal health seriously. And that means being at the forefront of disinfecting surfaces, hardware, even if it's a sort of a contained micromobility solution, the air inside that particular vehicle. And doing a good job sort of on the back end, if it's a scooter, those that are going around collecting them nightly and organizing them, being very transparent with the cleaning processes. And I think it will come back, as well as sort of making sure that people understand the types of PPE that you should be wearing when you're sharing transportation. One of the big changes that I think you will see is not necessarily in the vehicles themselves or the number of vehicles on the road, but I do think what this crisis has proven out is that cities have been quick to act to shut roads down and make those roads cycling routes, micromobility routes, walking routes. I mean, you saw Brussels close 40 kilometers of bike lanes. Oakland closed 75 miles of roads. It's like 10% of the roads in the city for cycling, different micromobility solutions and walking. Bogota, parts of Scotland, New York, Paris. That to me is I think a very positive trend at a time when there's not too many positive trends. And then when you think of micromobility, that doesn't necessarily move people, but moves goods. I mean, obviously the revolution is all over the news right now with contactless delivery, ground drones. You're seeing what Neuro has been able to do with Kroger and CVS and Domino's and other corporates with their robot that delivers groceries, medical supplies, etc. But the innovation there, the curbside innovation, isn't only with the companies that are developing these technologies, with the cities who are moving mountains permitting wise to allow restaurants to now have pickup points, for example, and even loosening some other sidewalk restrictions. So that's a good example of the public and the private sector working together.
In all this talk of new interesting technology, whether it's an electric vehicle or a increasingly autonomous vehicle, it's people on the lower end of the economic spectrum are too often left out of these conversations. And as mass transit, which has been traditionally their route to mobility, has become hampered, and even there's been fears of safety. You mentioned that the tragic death of 100 transit workers dying across the United States. What innovative solutions and what are some of the thoughts around how we can provide safe and sustainable and equitable mobility solutions in this time of COVID-19?
Yeah, that's a great and important question. I mean, to me, I personally believe that the future of mobility should, sure, make us safer, and it should make us more productive, make our communities greener, but just as importantly, it should uphold a person's dignity and allow that person to, have a job they're proud of and feed their family and enjoy their community. And so, I mean, there are certain things that this pandemic exposed in a very raw way, and I think public transit is on the short list of things that need to be revisited. I mean, first of all, protecting those that are driving through partitions. I mean, that's a simple fix. And the state actually is working with Penske and RCO Engineering, which is a Macomb County supplier, to install partitions for bus drivers now. But beyond that, how do we protect riders from those that may be infected? To me, the solution isn't just dividers, though, or partitions. I think the solution reaches up and down the chain of events that happens as a person moves about their community. I mean, I think some of these jobs that folks are having to rely on public transit for could be done at home and maybe even more effectively. So how can we get more technology into the hands of those that maybe have had barriers with that in the past? How can we create things like, let's say, like a mobility wallet or a subscription program that allows folks not to simply rely on the bus, but to have an opportunity to try other things, whether it's a scooter or an e-bike or even Uber or Lyft over time, or whatever's available in the community. And then how do we make the bus drive ride a little bit more pleasurable, something that is more comfortable, something that's more communal. There are certain things that I think, especially in Detroit, I mean, the bus system is great, and I know people that don't need cars down here. But many times, you live in Detroit, and it's just like, if you don't have a car, it's like not wearing a belt. The truth is, like, we need to encourage integration of folks that maybe, sure, have a car into our public transit system, to use it, to see how great it is, and frankly, to point out some things that could be done better. And in doing so, that raises the revenue for these sorts of services. And then you have this new asset that everyone can use, regardless of how much money they make at their job or where they live. And I know that's a long way off, but I think it's achievable.
Well, I'm really glad that you mentioned some of those moves towards cities finding ways to reduce driving and look at shared spaces and spaces that increase livability, walkability, and some of those micro mobility solutions. One of the areas that Zpryme has really been focused on is what does the recovery look like, whether it's from a municipal government perspective, from a clean energy perspective, and then also from the mobility perspective. How will the intersections of those three industries come together, particularly around electric vehicles and autonomous vehicles, as we look over the next 12 to 24 months and a robust economic recovery?
And that's a big question. So
It is a big question.
Take a swing at it. I think the answer lies in the six megatrends: autonomous, connected, shared, electrified, next-gen manufacturing, and assembly cost pressure that many of the traditional automakers are facing. So I think that industry disruption is shifting some of the value pools and creating some new winners and losers. And I think this pandemic has accelerated some of that winning and losing, specifically among non-auto players. You think like NVIDIA and Google / Waymo. You think of the tier one and tier two supply bases, which are now integrating forward and backward. You're seeing tier twos become tier ones, and tier ones now going backward actually, and looking at producing batteries and electronics and selling systems versus parts. You have new OEMs like Rivian, Bollinger, and you have the traditional OEMs, which are now actually going backward and thinking about how to create their own parts to capture more of the margin. Like e-axles, for example, is a component that we've seen a little bit of that. But the truth is, like what I just shared with you, and sort of the winners and the losers and the value pools, all of that sort of in one pre-crisis snapshot. And it's too soon to tell sort of the outcome of what really the past 3 months and what I think will be the next 2 years will show us. The truth is that the anatomy of the car is changing. The content suppliers need to provide for the car is going to change. In terms of EV penetration, I think there was a study done by Harvard that looked at some of the world's busiest cities, their pollution rates and their COVID-19 mortality. And what was found was that the cities with more pollution had more COVID-19 deaths. And you think about the benefits of electrification and cleaning the air above our cities, that to me is a great reason to continue down the road of revising emission standards. But a lot of EV penetration will depend on what oil prices do, as we go. When you look at autonomous driving, yeah, I mean, the testing and the deployments needed are going to probably have to take a hiatus some months, some years, and it could still delay things. But I think as far as everything I've read, we're still on pace for 2030, 2035, that time frame to be when autonomy begins, at least L3 autonomy begins to, and frankly, even L4 begins to take shape in a way where most people can see it and realize the benefits of it. So it's a big question. I kind of answered it from the supply chain angle and some of the dynamics there, but I can tell you one thing when it comes to electrification. So I work, for Michigan, state of Michigan, and our supply chain has a particularly low percentage of the electric vehicle industry. We have 11% share, and actually it's expected to fall to 8%. Tesla, GM, and Nissan lead EV production in the US, but little of that is done in Michigan. So that's going to be a real focus for me over the next couple of years, is thinking about not only new ways to talk to the EV producers, but thinking about ways to really activate our state's charging infrastructure in a unique way that involves interstate partnerships, Who knows? Like maybe there's a Great Lakes circuit at some point. And then also thinking of all the different policy tools like incentives, charters, fleet guidelines for electric vehicles, or at least state government vehicles. There are different things that can be done. So I threw a lot at you there, but those are just some of the things on my mind.
Well, Trevor, I got to say, what you have thrown at us is very thoughtful, very informative. And I think the key takeaway from this is that whether it's micromobility solutions, a comfortability in returning to mass transit solutions from the city bus to the light rail to a plane, and then even on to what innovation looks like over the next decade, flexibility and a degree of resiliency is going to be crucial as businesses, cities, and all the stakeholders take their seat at this innovation table around mobility. So thank you very much.
Yeah, it's good to be here. Thank you.
And we look forward to all of the great work that the Michigan Economic Development Corporation does. Thank you again for sharing that great article. People can find it on zpryme.com. And we will talk to you soon. Thank you.
Sounds good. Thank you.